Hi, in this application that we're going to build together, we're going to demonstrate how to use Ajax using a ASP.NET C# application. So Ajax is a partial page update technology. So you'll see what I mean here. You can see on the screen that I have a bunch of radio buttons with customers. If I choose one, such as Jerry, the area in the bottom part of the page is updated. I can also choose somebody and then submit, and it also works. So I've got two ways to update this. Notice the console app over here on the right, or the console of the website, is showing the new data that's being replaced over here in this region. So I'm doing some console logging. Also, you notice the time. So at the time when the page was loaded, it was 10:27 a.m. and now when I clicked the button, it was 10:29. So right now it's 10:29 with 2 seconds. Let's choose Wendy, and you can see that it is now a few seconds later. So the point of putting a time on the screen is to show you that this part of the screen remained intact and this part was updated. So that's what Ajax is all about. So we're going to work with JavaScript, C#, ASP.NET, and we're going to make this demonstration here of Ajax in an application. So let's get started on the coding now. So let's get started with building the application. So I'm going to choose a Visual Studio 2019 for my environment, and then I'm going to create a new project. The project is of type C#, ASP.NET Core. I'm going to choose the model view controller and name this thing as Ajax example, let's say. So these are all pretty standard settings that we've been doing in other activities. So once you're all done here, you will have a new project that we're ready to start on. So we need some kind of data to work with. So let's create a new model. So we'll go into the models folder, right click and choose a new file. We'll make it a class. And for the properties of the class, I'm going to, for the customer model that we're creating here, let's add an integer for an ID number. And let's add a string for the person's name and another integer for their age. So this is just kind of information that you can modify to your choice if you like. If you want to use something besides these three properties, you can, but they're obviously there for demonstration purposes. So we got a customer model with an ID, name, and age. Next, we're going to need a controller to manage the pages that we display. So let's right-click in the controllers area, choose a new controller, and I'm going to name my controller as Customer Controller. This controller is going to have a data source, and so we'll just make static data to make this application work. No databases involved. So we're going to make a new list of type of model, of a customer model, and we'll call it customers, and we'll initialize the list as an empty list. So next we need to initialize the values of customers. So let's make a constructor for our controller. So CTOR is the shortcut, which you can type in and then press tab twice. Then inside of that controller, we're going to make an addition to the customers list. So customers.add is the function you're looking for. Inside of the add method, we're going to make a new customer model. And so we're going to invent some data. So let's say the ID of the first person is 0. The second item is their name. Let's say Sherry is a good idea. And make up an age. So 42 sounds like a good number to me. So now I'm going to copy the first line and paste it several times until I have about 5 or 6 different customers. Then for each customer, let's update their data. So we're going to have the numbers are different. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for their ID numbers. So let's go with Melvin at age 18. And I think Jerry sounds like a good name. So let's pick 26, sounds like a Jerry age. And Velma is 34. And then Wendy we'll give as age 7. And let's say Kim. We'll pick Kim, and Kim is going to be 82. So now we have an initialized list of customers. So you can put any data in here you like, but if you want to see the example that I made, these are the numbers that I'm using. Now, in previous tutorials, I forgot how to put in the navigation usually, or left that toward the end. Let's do that first. So let's go into the layouts area in the views folder. I'm looking in shared _ layouts. And then in that area we have the navbar section. So I'm going to add a new link to the navbar so we can actually get to this part. So I'm going to copy and paste the existing privacy link and replace it with some new data. So this is from the ASP controller called customer, and the action is the default action index, and we put in here for the text, let's put in products, or customers, I guess is probably what we're doing here, customers. So next we're going to display these customers. So let's go back to the controller and let's add something to the index view. So the index view needs to have some data, so let's send it along the entire customers list. So we'll put that in the parentheses. Then we'll right click inside of the function or in the method called index, and we'll make a new view. So this view is going to be of the template of the type list. So we want to show an entire list of everybody, and I want to make the customer model as the type of data that we're sending, and then we'll click next. Let's run this and see what it looks like. So my app is up and running, and you can see the new link in the nav bar says customers, and if you look at the bottom it says we are going to the customers controller, and since there's no extra items it will produce the index. The index view is the list that we just created. So it looks to me like it's working properly. We have all of the names of the people that we created in our controller. Now, as you saw at the early part of the demonstration on this video, I'm going to make this as a clickable list of radio buttons. So let's delete the entire list of code that the computer made for us. Now I'm going to make a for each loop, so I'm going to go through each item in the model, and I'm going to name each individual as item. So now inside of that loop, we're going to make an unordered list, and so an LI is a list item. So LI, and we're going to put inside of there two items. We're going to have an input type radio, so I'll make a radio button. And for each radio button, I'm going to assign the name equals to the ID, and as well as the ID itself is ID. And then for the value, we're going to assign it the item's ID number. So at item.id. Then the label will actually show the person's name. So we'll do label and at item.name. Now outside of the for loop, we also need to include the wraparound, which is the UL tag. So UL stands for unordered list, and then each item inside of there is a list item. So UL is the outside, and then LI is for each item in the list. So that's basic HTML code. All right, we've got the application running, so let's click on the customers link, and sure enough, we see that we have all of the people with their names and a radio button in front of it. So we're going to change this into a form where we can submit and then do some processing on it, but we've got at least the display part done. So let's return to the code. Now we're going to add a form around the items that we've just created earlier. So a form to begin and end. Now for the form, we need an action. So we will say ASP-action is going to be equal to the method that we haven't created yet. We'll call it show one person. However, we do have a controller, so we'll use ASP-controller as the word customer. So the customer controller is going to have a method called show one person. And then at the bottom of the page, let's add an item, an area called a div, and we'll call it customer information area as an ID. And so we're putting information down at the end. So let's run this application and see what it looks like now. So let's go to the customers area and show the index page. And sure enough, we can see everybody on the list plus this new item below. I'm going to inspect the page to see what kind of details are in of these radio buttons. So let's go and select one of them. Let's try Melvin. And you can see that his value for his button is 1. Let's expand the previous one, and you can see that the value of this radio button is 0. So this is important, that the values are sequential according to the ID numbers of each person in the list. So it looks pretty much like we're doing that. 0, 1, 2, and 3 are going down. So now if I choose the submit button, we should see an error that says there is no action for show one person. We're going to have to do that next. Now there's a few things I can do in CSS to make this look good, so let's just take about 30 seconds to do this. For the UL, I'm going to remove those bullet points, so that is called list style type, and we'll set it to none. And then for the area where we're going to display the customers at the bottom of the page, let's put a border. So we'll do a border of 1 pixel, black, solid. We'll make a radius so that the way the rounded edges are there, and we'll add some padding and some margin. So let's see what that looks like. Let's go ahead and run this again. Let's choose customers, and this time you can see that when we have the bullets here, they don't have that annoying bullet point in front of them, and then the customer area is clearly defined as a separate section. That will be important when we start doing the partial page updates. Alright, so now we're going to go back into the controller, and we're going to create that method or the action that is associated with the item that we just showed in the other page. So the action is called show one person, and we're going to expect to have an ID number. So that ID number is going to come from one of the radio buttons. So the ID number is an integer. And then we're going to return a view and show one customer. Now, that customer is going to have to come from a query. And so since we don't have a database, we can just use a method that's built right into the list actions of C#. So we're going to create a new customer called C. Just let C is a good name. And that will become customers dot. We want to do the first or the default of some method inside the parentheses. Now the method is to say, take a function. In this case, it's an arrow function. So x is the input, and so if x.id matches the ID number from the parameter, then we will have a match, and then we'll return that as C to the view. Now I've got a problem here. Something's underlined, and let's look at the error. It says you can't implicitly convert type int to bool. Okay, so what I did is I forgot, if I'm doing a check to see if something is equal, we need a double equal sign. A single equals, of course, is for assignment. Now this will display a single page with one person. Well, we don't have the view yet called show one person, so we have to make that. So let's let the computer automatically create that page for us. So we'll right click anywhere inside the action, choose make a view, and then for the view we're going to leave it as show one person for the name. We're going to use the details template. Details is to show one item, and then the model, of course, is customer model, and then we will click the OK button. So let's see how this runs. So let's run the application and click customers and see what happens. So now when we see Melvin as an item selected and choose submit, we should get Melvin as show one person as the view name suggests. If we go back to the list, we can pick somebody else. Let's try Velma and choose submit, and we get Velma's information. So far this has nothing to do with Ajax. This is standard full refresh. We see a full page every time we click an item. So what we're going to do next is, instead of showing that page in a separate web refresh, we're going to substitute the information down here where it says display customer information here. We're going to fill in that with the other view, and so we'll do some Ajax to make that happen. Alright, so we're going to make some changes. First of all, the return type of the view should be changed from view to partial view. So partial view means obviously we're going to see a part of the page. Then let's jump into the JavaScript code. So let's go look in www.root, find the folder called JavaScript or JS, find site, and then we're going to add a starter function here. So this will let us know if the page has been loaded and ready to go. So inside of the function, we're going to have a console log and say page is ready. Let's run this and see what happens. So what I'm really interested in to know is, did that actually load? So let's go inspect the page so we can see the console. And sure enough, we see the console message that says page is ready. So it has been loaded. That means we're ready to do some programming in Ajax. Now we're going to tie an Ajax event to the button on our submit form. So let's go and find that ID number, copy the ID value, and switch back into JavaScript. So now I want to associate a click event with that button. So we'll do $, and then the ID number, which is select customer. We're going to associate a click event with it, and then a function to run. Now that function needs to have something called event.preventDefault. So normally when you click submit, you get a page refresh. So we want to prevent that from happening and instead run the following code. In our case, we're just going to do another console log and say that this button was clicked. So we're ready to test that out. Let's run it and then click on the customer's link. And so now we need to see the console. So let's inspect it, choose console, and it says page is ready. So now when I choose the submit button, we have the message that says select was clicked and the page did not completely reload. So even though we have somebody selected, the button only responds now to the JavaScript code. So remember before when we selected Kim and submit, it showed a whole new page. Well, that event.prevent_default is preventing that from happening, so now we get to control everything through JavaScript. Alright, so now it's time to do some requests to get some data from our partial view. So we're going to use Ajax again. So $Ajax is the function name, and inside this function name there are curly brackets which says we are creating a object, a JSON object. The first item in the JSON object is the type of request. So this is a form, and it's going to submit a post request. So that's what we're trying to simulate here. So we'll say type equals post. The URL is the name of the controller / action. So we want to get one user. And then our data. So we're going to serialize all of the data from the form. So the form includes all of the radio buttons and all of the items that are on that HTML page. So serialize, we'll put it into a nice format so that way the server can understand it. And then success is the function that we get to work with after the data is fetched. So it'll send back a chunk of data, and we'll just name it data as the parameter of our function. And for right now, we're just going to console log it, so that way we can see what we're dealing with and how we'll use it to update the page. So check this out. We got Ajax. We got 4 types here. We got post, URL is the action. We got the data, which is our form, and then we've got the response, which is going to be the function that we call at the end called success. So let's run this and see what it does. Okay, so we're going to run the application. I'm going to right click and inspect so I can get to the console and see all these nice messages over here. Okay, the page is ready. So let's choose customers, and let's select Sherry to start with and choose submit. So you can see that I made a mistake. The error says there's a 404 going on, and it says get one person doesn't exist. I think I named that wrong. It's supposed to be show one person. So the nice thing about JavaScript and CSS that you don't have to stop the program to make it changes. So we're going to try this again. So I'm going to rename this URL instead of get one person. I'm going to say show one person and see if that works any better. So I will save this. I don't have to stop the application. I'm going to just refresh the browser, and let's see if this works any better. So I'm going to choose Sherry and submit. And this time I get a couple of messages. First of all, it says the select button was clicked, which is good. Now the new information here comes from the partial view. So you can see that there's a div, and then it has all of the items about a customer model. So the customer model is 0, the name is Sherry, and the age is 42. Seems to be working. Let's try Melvin and choose submit. So some more text comes through, and now we can see that Melvin, his ID is 1, his name is Melvin, and his age is 18. So this text here obviously is HTML text, and we can use this now to replace what's in here. So instead of just console logging, we're going to do some work in the DOM, the document object model. So I'm not going to even stop the application. I'm just going to switch over to the JavaScript and edit there. So after I log the data, it's pretty simple now to replace a piece of the page. So the section that is for the data to be displayed in was called Customer Information Area. And I put a # because that indicates it's an ID. And then we want to replace whatever the HTML contents was with the new data, which is this variable called data. Let's see if that works. So I'm going to come back and refresh the page now. And if I choose Sherry and submit, we get the replacement shows up in the console log, but also you can see down below the partial view gave us this data for Sherry. Let's try the others and see if they work. So sure enough, we can now do a partial page update. We are replacing only a segment of the page with the information of the customer. So now I'm going to put some date stamps on here so we can prove to ourselves that yes, one part of the page is updated and the other is not. So in the index area where we display the form with all the radio buttons, let's just put in the segment that says current time, and then we'll use this variable called at datetime.now. And we will put that into a p tag, so it'll be on its own line. And then I'm going to copy and paste that and put it into the show one person form as well. So that will also show the date time. So we'll see two different dates on the page. Now I've got something underlined. What doesn't it like? It says an object. Apparently I'm not supposed to put parentheses there. That's not a method. That's just now. And so I need to do a little typo fixing here. Let's go back and change that without the parentheses. And I think we're ready to run. Let's see what happens. Okay, so we're ready to run. Let's go to the customers area. And you can see the current time now shows up when I did this. So this was 11:41. So let's choose Sherry and submit. And you can see the difference is now 7 seconds. So 41:20 was up here and 41:13. Let's try another person, and you can see that the model here for Kim updated, the time updated, but this is not updating. So it's just a way to empirically show that we have two segments of the page. One is updated and the other one remains the same. So the advantage of all this Ajax work is to help your customers, help your users, so that the page refreshes are less, the response of your application is better, which means they're going to stick around and use your program more. I'm going to make one more change. So this requires 2 clicks right now when I click Melvin and submit. Now I'm going to have it so it automatically submits the button when I select a radio button. So let's check that next. So now we're going to turn this radio button into an automatic submit. So this is really just a JavaScript trick that we can make this work. So let's go back into the index page where we showed all the radio buttons. And I'm going to give this thing a class. So the input, we'll call it class name equals customer radio. So let's switch over to the JavaScript. And now I'm going to create an event for any button that is of that class. So .customer radio is the class name. And then let's have an event called change that we associate it with it. So change is kind of like click, but it only works when the button is either selected or deselected. So not every time you click, just when it changes. So inside of the action of the function, let's put a console log to make sure we can test it. We'll say that the radio button has been changed. And let's invent a new function, because I don't want to have to copy and paste all of the work that we did for the Ajax. We should put that in its own function. So I'll call it doCustomerUpdate. That sounds like a good function name. And then we'll define that just below here as function doCustomerUpdate. So next I'm just going to copy or cut all of the information out of the Ajax section and put it inside of doCustomerUpdate. And so then we'll replace what it was as the action on the customer button and put doCustomerUpdate there. So 2 ways to produce this effect, the doCustomerUpdate. One is when you select the button, and then the second is the submit button, really, which is going to become irrelevant soon. But let's see how this works. Okay, we got the app running. We better get the console open so we can see all the nice little console logs. And let's choose customers. Let's pick somebody. So I'm going to choose Sherry. And you notice that as soon as I clicked, it automatically did all of the work here. So doCustomerUpdate was called. Now I can also click the submit button, and you can see the console log is showing that something's happening. But since Melvin was already selected, we didn't notice any changes. So we've gotten to the end here of a first example of Ajax using C#. Now it's a lot like what we did with the previous tutorials on PHP, but this is involving obviously some controllers and actions in a C# application. So some of the key terms here, we've got Ajax running, and another important part was in the action in the controller. So don't forget that we changed the view to partial view. So partial view is important, which means we don't show the entire web page, which leaves open the door of using Ajax to substitute a portion of that page. So there you go. We're going to move on and do a more complex version of this and show an enhancement of a previous tutorial called our products application that showed a whole grid full of things. So we're going to do some edits and display properties of each of those using Ajax instead of a full page refresh. So that's coming next.